والله يدعو إلى دار السلام ويهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It is so unfortunate that just as the Muslims were winning the battle of Uhud, because of a mistake, a disobedience from the part of the archers, that this victory had almost turned into a defeat for the Muslims. Though the Prophet ﷺ instructed the archers not to descend from the mountain until they get a clear directive from him ﷺ to do so, no matter what happens, yet once they saw the army of the polytheist escape the battlefield, they wanted this worldly life. They wanted the booty. They wanted to get all what they can get along with their brother soldiers. So they disobeyed the instruction of the Prophet ﷺ. And as a result, their victory almost turned into a defeat. Khalid ibn al-Walid, with the riders alongside him, went from behind the Muslims to the mountain of the archers, killed the 10 remaining Muslims who were defending the army, and then started to attack the Muslims from behind. And he called his brethren from the polytheist to come back and fight again. They realized that he managed and he succeeded to go from behind the Muslims, so they all came and they attacked the Muslims once again. The Muslims, amidst the chaos, were confused. Some of them threw their swords and just sat down without fighting, because they heard that the Prophet ﷺ was killed. Others started fighting whomever they saw in front of them, to the extent that they even killed some of the companions, not recognizing that they were also Muslims. Others were in despair and thought of going to the hypocrites, Abdullah ibn Ubay, to ask him to intercede with Abu Sufyan so that he would spare their lives. Others fled the battlefield altogether and went to Medina. And Allah Azza wa Jal has described all of these as the believers in the Quran. And He also had granted them forgiveness. So there is no excuse for anyone to come and accuse them of treason or of being coward or of doing something that was wrong. It was wrong. Allah Azza wa Jal blamed them for that, but He also told us that He had forgiven their sins. Of course, when the Prophet saw this, ﷺ, he had only two choices. Either he would flee the battlefield and go to Medina to regroup and get another army and save himself and those who were with him. And he had only 9 men with him. And as we know, he was at the back of the army. Khalid was the closest one with his knights and riders. And they were faster than anyone else because they had horses. And the Prophet had a camel. And his companions were on foot. Yet there was a chance for the Prophet ﷺ to escape the battle. but this meant that he would abandon his companions. The second choice, which was the hardest, was for him to remain, to call his companions to regroup around him, and then unite once again. And the Prophet chose the second choice. He called among the companions, "Come to me, servants of Allah." They recognized the voice, so they all went back to the Prophet ﷺ. But the polytheists were closer, so they started attacking the Prophet ﷺ and those who were with him. We mentioned before that 7 of the Ansar, each one of them, fought bravely, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Who would defend us, and Allah Azza wa Jal will make him on the Day of Judgment with me in paradise." And this is all what we live for. Our lives in this world is just a passing through phase, and our final destination is paradise. So for them, this is what you're living for, so might as well die for it. Because if you compare life to the hereafter, it's like comparing a drop of water to the oceans. And again, the comparison is not in its place, because life is maximum 60, 70, 100 years that you're going to spend on this world. But on the hereafter, it's infinity. There is no ending to it. So they all fought one by one, bravely, until they died at the feet of the Prophet ﷺ. And then the remaining 2 from the Muhajirin, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas and Talha ibn Ubaidillah, fought even harder until they were wounded so bad, defending the Prophet ﷺ and attacking the enemy army. Talha ibn Ubaidillah, they found more than 39 wounds in him, protecting the Prophet ﷺ, taking all the swords and the arrows and the spears that came in his direction, covering the Prophet, shielding the Prophet with his body. The polytheists, some of them came from behind the Prophet ﷺ. Some of them threw stones at the Prophet, so he fell on his side and he broke one of his teeth and his head was wounded and he started bleeding. One of them hit him with a spear, but it could not go through, but it had 2 of the rings of the shield that he has on the helmet go into his cheek, and it started also bleeding. One of them hit the Prophet on his shoulder with a sword, but because of the shield it did not go through and penetrate, but it affected his shoulder for a whole month. It was very tensed, and they were walking a very thin line, but they had no choice. This is the message of Allah, and they have to fight for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Came Abu Bakr and Abu Ubaidah, were the first to arrive, and they started defending the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Ubaidah saw these rings in the Prophet's cheek, and he wanted to take them out. He couldn't. So he grabbed them with his teeth, and he pulled them, and 2 of his teeth fell on this process. Imagine the pain and agony they were in, only to protect the Prophet ﷺ. What kind of love they had in their hearts. They would sacrifice themselves.
I believe that the school which they learned in it, which is the Prophet's school, ﷺ, give them that education which they believed 100% in their hearts that it's only one choice, Jannah.
Well, this is every Muslim's choice. This is what we all live for. Why do you think we abandon lots of the things that non-Muslims enjoy? Aren't we men? Don't we want to enjoy what they are enjoying? Don't we want to gain money, whether it's by cheating, usury, killing people, whatever? Why don't we abuse people? Why don't we commit adultery? Why don't we drink intoxicants? Why don't we lie? Why aren't we hypocrites? Why don't we do this and that? Because Allah tells us, don't do this, and at the end, you are going to end up in paradise. And Allah mentions in the Holy Quran that whoever is turned away from hell and who is allowed to enter paradise, then he has won. So Allah Azza wa Jal defines winning for us, it's not to have a beautiful wife. It's not to have a beautiful house and a car. It's not to have a fat and wealthy bank account. It's not to be handsome. It's not to be healthy. The winning aspect is that you do not enter hell and you enter paradise. And this can only happen if you follow, if you submit your will to the will of Allah Azza wa Jal, and if you follow the sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet then was rescued, in a sense, by 10 of his bravest companions. They all came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and they went to one side of the hill of Uhud, and they got their back to it, and they started fighting and defending the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Abu Sufyan and Khalid bin al-Walid tried with some soldiers and knights to ride over the mountain and descend over the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet saw them and told Umar they should not be on top of us. No non-Muslim should be on top of us. So Umar went with few of his companions, and they managed to get them down. And this shows you how brave Umar and how strong Umar is, to the extent that he got Khalid ibn Walid and Abu Sufyan to descend from the mountain, unable to achieve what they came for. Ibn Qami'ah, may Allah have all his wrath and punishment on him, he's the one that hit the Prophet ﷺ on his back. And he kept on fighting and fighting until he saw the man who was holding the flag of the Muslims, Mus'ab ibn Umair. Because Mus'ab looked like the Prophet ﷺ, he attacked him. He chopped one of his hands. Mus'ab took the flag with his left. He chopped the other one. Mus'ab took the flag with his chest to the ground. He killed Mus'ab ibn Umair. Once he killed him, he thought that he had succeeded in killing the Prophet ﷺ. So he shouted in the mushrikeen, I have managed to kill the Prophet ﷺ. What do you think happened? Because he shouted at the mushrikeen, their intensity of attack went down, because they felt that they have achieved their objective.
Succeeded.
Yes. This meant that the Muslims had a very good chance to regroup again, because the intensity of the attacks were reduced. And that's what happened. Umar ibn Khattab wanted to shout back and say, you are a liar, he's not dead. So the Prophet told him, shh, don't talk. Let them think that they've killed me until we regroup. What happened after that is inshallah what we will learn after the break. Stay tuned, and inshallah we will be right back.
That the translation has been indirectly influenced with the Israelite narrative.
We haven't faced any problems in our preparations.
We can't call it the wise Hajj. In Egypt, you have a huge amount of initiative going on in terms of developing qualifications in different parts of the system.
Reading helps you gain knowledge, but saving the net doesn't help you at all.
They are all welcome to participate in the discussion and the debate about the development of qualifications.
What types of books our children do or should read?
Join me for further discussion of Focus Point.